Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to the webinar, How to Optimize Katalon Test Automation with SeaLights. I am Abigail Stein from SeaLights, the software quality intelligence platform, and I will be facilitating this webinar. Today, we will introduce SeaLights test optimization and demonstrate how Katalon users can implement SeaLights to shorten testing cycles. First up, we have Coty Rosenblath, CTO at Katalon. Coty leads the company's engineering teams and is a hands-on technology leader with experience designing, building, and deploying enterprise software. And then we will have Alon Eisenman, CTO and co-founder of SeaLights. Alon has over 20 years of experience as an entrepreneur, building emerging and high-growth enterprise software, and he has held several senior management positions within large technology companies. Throughout the webinar, we will have representatives from both Katalon and SeaLights monitoring the chat and QA box. So register questions at any point in the session, and we will answer them live. At the end of the webinar, we will have a dedicated Q&A session for any remaining questions. So let's get started. Hi, Coty. Hi, Alon. Happy to have you with us today.
Thanks, Abigail. Happy to be here. So terrific. Thanks everyone for joining us today at whatever time of day it is for you. I'm here in Atlanta, Georgia in the late morning, and I'm here to talk about how to optimize Katalon test automation with SeaLights, and I'm excited to be joined by our partners at SeaLights. So I'm going to start out just with a slide that we talk through with a lot of our customers, and it's about the increasing demand that we're all facing for delivering software. We have to deliver more, faster, with higher quality, and that's just the nature of today's environment, right? We have technology taking over everything. COVID is only accelerating that as we do more and more online, from our work to our children's school, to maybe our own school, to food delivery and everything else. And we're finding that, as we're delivering, increasingly complicated and critical software, we have to test that software, and testing can form a bottleneck. What we find in talking with customers is that, although a lot of testing is automated, there's still a lot that is manual. And at Katalon, we've been building tools and a platform for some time to help our customers, help the industry move from manual testing to automated testing. We started that with our Katalon Studio product that we'll be seeing today a good bit. Where you can record tests and then manage those tests with simple, low-code, scriptless automation. We've extended that to our test ops platform, where you can orchestrate and manage those tests, report on their performance, get intelligent analytics, and manage test execution. And 2 weeks ago now, we released our Test Cloud product that allows you to execute tests within cloud-hosted environments where you can have access to multiple browser and operating system versions, and in the future, multiple device versions as well. But even though automation can help manage that bottleneck as we automate our integration of software and delivery of software and ultimately testing of software, there's still only so much time in the day. And after we've done all the things we can to automate, there's still work to do to work smarter, not just harder. And that gets to organizing and optimizing your test execution. And so that's what I'm going to really drill into today. Though certainly when we get into the Q&A session, I'd love to, talk about other parts of the test and development lifecycle that anyone's interested in as well. But so I'm going to focus on test organization, the grouping of tests into test suites and collections, ways that you can tag tests so that you can have more than just a hierarchical structure, but a cross-cutting structure. And finally, I'm going to talk about dynamic test suites, ways that you can combine those hierarchical and cross-cutting structures to manage your tests. All of that is going to be a setup for Alon to then talk about how SeaLights works with those features in the Katalon platform to let you do even more to optimize your test execution. So I'll start out just with where everybody starts. You are probably just recording tests. They're in a flat hierarchy. You start out with a simple set of tests. Here I've just started my sort of test authoring journey with logging into my application, and it's pretty manageable. I can probably run all these in a few minutes. I've automated it. I'm good. Of course, as my system under test expands and becomes more complicated, so do my tests. But I can manage that. I can start to group them together into hierarchical folders. You can see here, I've now got my test cases broken up into maybe some of my web services that I'm testing, some common test cases that cross boundaries, and then I've got sort of my core main set of test cases. But it keeps going. I've got more tests. I start to break up my common test cases and my main test cases into even further categories based on function or the particular entity within my software that they're interacting with. Maybe I have a bunch of tests about the candidates. This is a candidate application that we're looking at, actually. So people who are applying for certain jobs. So maybe I'm starting to group together everything that's about testing candidates, or everything that's about logging in. Over time, that becomes too much, and I need to start taking all of those test cases that I've built up in my test case repository and start to group them into test suites that have particular functions. So maybe I have a test suite for just smoke testing, just finding out whether my system is ready to go out the door. Maybe it's not perfect, but I've hit all the high points. So I start to manually pick tests and put them into a test suite that I know performs a certain function. Maybe I have test suites for my various sprints. Maybe I have something that's a complete end-to-end, really covers everything. Katalon Studio and the rest of the Katalon platform let you create these test suites. So you can take the test cases and put them into lots of different groupings that you can execute together. Maybe not surprisingly, as we've been building up in complexity, I also need to consider how my test suites are going to interact with the environments that my software operates in. So we also have the idea of a test suite collection. A test suite collection for us is a way of taking a test suite and executing it in a certain configuration. Here you see our smoke test suite executing against a number of different browser and device platforms. This is a common use of this test suite collection construction because we're all building for a wide variety of deployment platforms these days. We also have the ability to manage different profiles. So maybe you have a test suite and you want to run it against a couple of different staging environments that you have that represent maybe different customer configurations or other configurations of your software. So all of the things that I've talked about so far have been largely hierarchical groupings of testing. So you can take test cases and break them out into folders and folders of folders. We can then group those into test suites, and we can have hierarchies of test suites. But oftentimes, probably every time, there are also cross-cutting elements of your test suite that you want to be able to identify and work with. For example, in each of your sort of groupings of test cases, you probably have some that are higher priority than others, things that are really critical to the functionality of your system. Or maybe you have modules that are spread across your systems. So here you see a feature that we introduced into the Katalon platform called tagging. Not uncommon in a lot of platforms, and it allows you to assign arbitrary tags to your test cases. So here I've said this is a P1, priority 1 test case. It tests the settings module, but it's also in the update profile grouping of test cases. And I can have within each of my hierarchical groupings, P1, P2, P3 tests that I can then pull together using a feature that we're going to talk about next, and that's called dynamic test suites. In contrast to the test suites that we've already talked about, where you are explicitly taking tests from your test case repository and placing them into a grouping, dynamic test suites let you define a test suite in terms of the features of the test. So the reason I introduced tagging was because a common use case for this is to take tests based on tags that you've applied so that you can quickly create a all P1 or all settings or all security test suite, and know that that test suite will always represent the current state of your sort of test system. Because as people add new tests, you don't have to update that test suite manually. You just have to make sure that those tests get tagged appropriately and they'll be pulled in. In addition to tags, you can also query based on ID, and that includes the ID of folders within the hierarchy. You can group by, as you can see, name, comments, descriptions. So this is a very flexible way of getting the right set of tests together. And that's going to be, just to kind of give a little foreshadowing, that's going to be a big part of what we leverage SeaLights to do, is to give us even more insight into what tests can run. Before I jump into that, I just want to mention that I've shown all these concepts for test organization within Katalon in the context of our Studio product, but these are also represented within our test ops management platform. So you can see here that all those same test cases, test suites, all that information is preserved in our test ops platform, where you can, just like you can in Studio, organize those tests, execute them, and view their results. Those same features are also expressed in our Test Cloud product, where you can choose to execute those test suites, test collections that you've defined against different execution environments, different browser setups, and ultimately in the next quarter across mobile devices. But getting back to our dynamic test suites, something that I didn't mention and may not have been obvious, but is that test suite, that dynamic test suite functionality is provided by what we call query plugins. And those query provider plugins are available. Some are built in, but we also have some that are available in our Katalon App Store. And as you might imagine, one of those that we're really excited about is one that was built by our partners at KMS for our partners at SeaLights. And it's one that integrates Katalon Studio with the SeaLights quality platform. and does two things. One, updates SeaLights with the results of Katalon test execution, and creates a new type of dynamic test suite within Katalon where SeaLights is able to inform us about what are the tests that ought to execute based on what SeaLights knows about what's changing in your application under test. And with that setup, I'm going to pass it over to Alon to talk about SeaLights and how they do this. As soon as I stop sharing.
Thank you, Coty. So now let me share my screen. Okay. Great. Coty, can you confirm that you see my slides?
Yes, we can.
Looks good.
Excellent. All right. So, so I'm going to start speaking about SeaLights test optimization value specifically for the Katalon customers on the call, or the ones that are considering Katalon, or even SeaLights customers on the call, you know, that might consider also embedding Katalon in their pipelines. So what you would gain is first, and you know, one of the most important, you would reduce your time to market, and that can be achieved, you know, by optimizing your long cycles, you know, whether it's in Katalon or even other testing frameworks. But the thing is that once you use SeaLights test optimization, you can optimize any of your test environments, any of your test stages, and with that, really reduce the whole testing or the whole delivery cycle, and you know, increase your release cadence. We have customers that had, you know, 3 months cadence, and now they are delivering on a weekly cadence. Discussing, you know, how you would shorten your testing cycles and what you would gain for that. It's mainly for, even if you have, you know, manual testing cycles, it's a huge decrease of cost of your delivery, and specifically, you know, ability to scale up with existing resources. And another thing is about test effectiveness, and how would you improve your test effectiveness with our machine learning engine, which is test impact analytics. And the thing is that in some cases, when test cycles are so long, and many organizations, I saw it with some of our customers, they in some cases they cannot, you know, test all the releases. So in those cases, they would even skip some tests, and that's a high risk. So with the ability to let SeaLights test optimization to select the right test and the relevant test for every execution, and run, you know, the relevant test in a shortened cycle, would really increase the effectiveness of the test that will be selected. Same goes for, you know, if selection, manual selection has to be made with our smart selection, you would really increase the confidence level when something is going to be released, and the whole selection is fully automated. Now, drilling down and talking about the selection mechanism, it's based on machine learning technology, as I said, for building those recommendations. The way it works is that we are mapping every single test to the actual code, the application code that it's running through. And when I'm speaking about application code, it's any layer. So even, you know, a UI test running through the front end, and then traveling in between several backend, we map every single test to all the different activities in all the different layers, all the different services. So it's based on real coverage, and also automatic identification of the changes. So the recommendation that is being created is very, very accurate. And the thing is that you do not really need to run all tests at all times. And we know how to basically skip those tests that are not relevant for a given build based on the changes made and the identification of the changes that we have, and providing an effective risk-based testing by running only tests that really have impact on the change. And with that, shortening the execution cycles. And this is available both for automated tests as well as manual tests. And any automated framework that you would have, and any manual testing that you would have, we can shorten everything, and this is mandatory in order to reduce the end-to-end delivery cycle time. Now, speaking about what do we select, and here the main thing is that you have to have very high confidence of why the fact that it's very accurate, and understanding of what we select would build this confidence. And the first type of test that we are selecting are impacted tests, and those tests are the ones that are testing or historically tested the areas of code that change for a given build. Okay, so given the fact you have tests, we would select those tests around the changes and maximize the coverage around among all the tests that you have around those changes. And then, regardless the changes, we would bring into the recommendation list all the tests that recently failed. Why? Because they might fail again, and we would need to double check them. Okay, so we cannot take a risk by ignoring those tests, and those tests are being added to the recommendation list. And another type of selection made is when you have dependencies between tests. So if we selected one test, we would also bring all the tests that are dependent on it into the recommendation list. If we selected something and for some reason the CI didn't trigger it, we would keep recommending those tests in future builds with other selections and other recommendations that we will create, and new tests. As we do not still have historic data on those tests, and they might fail for good reasons, we would also bring those into the recommendation list. And all in all, this list would include all the tests with even the tiniest probability of a failure. And the main thing is that we would skip all the other tests without compromising on quality. And this is really important because all the other tests have no probability of a failure. And that's the key here. Now, talking about test impact analytics and the selection is available for any automated frameworks, but also for any manual test. And in many cases, there is a combination between automated and manual activities, and you can optimize all the different stages. And those automated frameworks, even proprietary frameworks that you built in your organization, we also have public APIs that easily can build, the integration with any automated frameworks. Same as we did with Katalon. We use those APIs, and in very few days, we integrated SeaLights with Katalon. Also, given the fact that Katalon has this dynamic test suites module built in. Now, speaking about some use cases, really interesting use cases that we learned from our customers of optimizing their executions. First is around hotfixes, and specifically for hotfixes, there is a very limited time frame that teams can really test their systems. In many cases, those are manual testing teams, expert teams that get a task, get release notes, understand how they should test, In many cases, they would do some estimations of which tests they should run in this given limited time frame. In some cases, they might do mistakes, but with SeaLights test optimization, they get the list of all the tests that they have to run. And again, two things. One is that we are maximizing the coverage around the changes, so they release with more confidence. And second, they can really even push the time frame even further to be very, very limited. Another interesting use case is around efficiency, and specifically for regression testing cycles. So in many organizations, what we learn is that regression testing cycles are so long that you don't always have the luxury of running those regression tests over the daytime. So it's running overnight, in some cases over the weekend. So with test optimization, you can then start running some partial regression cycles on demand per build, having only the important or needed regression tests to be executed, and even have both, have partial regression cycles during the day and full regression cycles overnight or over the weekend. So with that, the efficiency and the feedback loop back into the dev team is increasing dramatically. Talking also about reducing the context switching of developers, moving into other tasks and then getting feedback from those regression tests too late, and then they need to do some context switching. So we are helping those dev teams to get feedback really, really fast for their important tests. And then about cost, specifically for manual testing. So manual testing cycles, we see usually long cycles over a week time, 2 weeks time, at the end of the cycle just before releasing. That can be decreased dramatically, and reducing the manual testing cycles time in many times translated to a reduction or very high reduction of cost. And very common use case is around time saving, and as I was talking about reducing time to market. But in most cases, for any test cycles, specifically those long test cycles, saves a lot of time. Now, talking about a real life use case and a large accounting firm that both Katalon and SeaLights running together there. The background was that this firm was in a process of building their standardizing pipeline as part of a very large transformation project. And they selected several leading testing frameworks, as well as built or selected the best CI/CD automation platforms. When they designed it, the challenge was, how would they create one pipeline that would fit all teams and quality needs? So they selected, the most or the leading testing frameworks, and Katalon is one of them. And they used SeaLights to optimize all those selected testing frameworks. And then also having SeaLights be embedded inside their pipelines to provide quality analytics as part of the pipeline, and be able to have quality governance be embedded inside those pipelines. And now when onboarding all teams into this new pipeline, it's an easier, I would say, selling point of this team to all the teams that are, considering on jumping in and onboarding into the new standardized pipeline. So with that, they're basically achieving quality at speed. Now moving back to Abigail for Q&A session.
Great, thanks, Alon. So we've had a lot of activity here, a bunch of questions. One moment. So the first question is for Katalon. Does Katalon also support metadata collection at the test suite level? And can you pull in a larger execution based on a query, as you do with test cases pulling into a dynamic test suite?
Yeah, so I think this question is asking whether a dynamic test suite can also query test suites and possibly other dynamic test suites. And Jazz can confirm, but dynamic test suites exclusively query the overall test case system. So if you wanted to recreate, let's say, the union of two test suites in a dynamic test suite, you would need to basically reference those both in the yeah, so that was Sean's question. You'd have to recreate that within the dynamic suite. I'm pretty confident that's correct.
Great, thanks. Another question. This is for Alon. How does SeaLights find impacted areas in builds and code?
Yeah, so we have our own listeners running inside the CI server and scanning the build artifacts, the binaries at the end of the build, and identify the areas that change automatically. And also we have test listeners running in any test environments, collecting or dynamically instrumenting the application code. And with that, we merge the two. And we understand exactly which tests were executed, how they are mapped to the code, what changed. And with that, we know exactly which test, given a change, are mapped to this code. Okay, so but we take the historical execution because when a new build is created, we need to understand which test we should select. So we take all these tests that in previous builds and historically tested this code that is now changing.
Great.
And just as a note, it may not be obvious too that part of the integration between Katalon and SeaLights is that we just, as part of your test execution, will update SeaLights with when test executed so they can build that correlation. So it's really kind of hidden from you. You just write tests and execute them.
Exactly. Thank you, Coty.
Okay, Alon, this one is for you. When you're running multiple tests in parallel, how do you know which test is executing which bit of code? Is there any manual work linking tests to code?
No manual work is needed. And our machine learning would know how to also handle parallel executions. We might recommend too many tests because we would not want to take any risk for you. But our machine learning engine would refine the list over time. So the more executions we get, the more accurate the per test coverage is. And what's usually happening is that we never miss a test, but we might save you 50% of the time at the beginning and then maybe 80% in later stages.
Great, thanks, Alon. Does SeaLights require code instrumentation in order to work?
Yeah, but we have this as part of our listeners. So once you implement our listeners in your CI and test environments, that's it. Everything is coming, out of the box. So we do instrumentations or dynamic instrumentations, but this is something we take care of with our listeners.
Okay, another question for Alon. Can SeaLights analyze change sets in products that are built from multiple source code repositories, would we have to tell SeaLights what repository branches to analyze?
Yeah, if it's like different different services built in different repositories, that's absolutely supported. We also have the ability to group together multiple different services into what we call integration build, and then run tests that are traveling in between those different services, and then we know how to map, as I said during my slides, we know how to map every single test to any activity in any service. Having said that, it's also relevant for like in case you're using third-party vendors libraries, and you would also include them in the application that you're testing. We can map also changes there to the tests that you need to run, your test that you need to run.
Thank you, Alon. Another question, does SeaLights provide quality metrics on Katalon tests when executed?
Absolutely, yes. Yes, so just to describe, I didn't talk about this during this webinar, but we provide quality analytics for any test execution, including Katalon, as of which changes, for example, that you made recently. And if I would be specific, from your last deployment into production to your recent build, which of those changes are still not tested by your Katalon test, but also end-to-end by all your tests. And then you're left with what we call quality risks on the end-to-end quality risks, which would tell you basically those changes that none of your tests across the entire pipeline that cover those changes. And some of those changes may include new potential defects that think about the code that will run the first time inside production. And that's where you have escaping defects. So by identifying it and improving your test, you basically shift left and be able to detect those potential defects in your pre-production environments and test them. Make sure that the teams are testing all the changes before they release them into production. Number of escaping defects will drop dramatically.
Great. So here's a real life, situation. Someone says one of the challenges they face when working with their DevSecOps folks is the need to limit the amount of time in the build pipeline. So he gets a hard cap on the amount of tests he can run before a build is flagged as good enough to progress. Does SeaLights or Katalon support this type of capability?
So is the question, I think, can we enforce a time limit on the pipeline so it fails if it takes more than a certain amount of time to run?
I believe they're saying that they have a limited amount of time.
Yeah. I mean, SeaLights and Katalon would certainly help you limit that time. If you made enough changes in your application that it exceeds that time, it would still run into your limits. But between limiting the set of tests that you have to run based on changes and potentially parallelizing test execution, we could try to minimize that as much as possible.
Yeah, I would say,
so could we look at a dynamic test plan that would run in a certain amount of time? That is not something we can do right now. That's an interesting question, because it's interesting. I don't think we can do it today. We'd have to really dig in to the historic time for those tests to run and some optimization queries, but that's a neat use case. Alon, you may have some thoughts on that.
Yeah, let me be creative here, but that's exactly that's exactly the integration between Katalon and SeaLights, and we would optimize the execution and fit it into a very limited time frame, same as I described for hotfixes. But there is a limit, I would say, because if you, let's say, usually run for 10 hours, and with the optimization, we take it down to 20 minutes. But if you would say, I want to push it into 10 minutes, that's impossible. But if it's a reasonable time, then yes, absolutely.
Okay, another question here. Does SeaLights and Build and KRE Katalon runtime engine run on the same machine? Usually Katalon node is different from a Build deployment node.
Wait.
Maybe we need some clarification on that question.
And also, I was reading some stuff, and I don't think I heard
Okay,
that.
so let me ask again. Does SeaLights and Build and KRE Katalon runtime engine run on the same machine?
Oh, no. So KRE, SeaLights, the way, sorry, this is probably not my question to answer. The way SeaLights operates is when you saw that configuration dialog, we are specifying where in sort of SeaLights operating environment we want to attach. So they're running in their own environment, their analytics system and processing system, KRE or KSE, the Katalon runtime engine or the Katalon Studio Enterprise would be running separately, and they are calling APIs and delivering results to SeaLights.
Yeah, in any case, the SeaLights engine is running in the cloud, and those listeners are running in your CI and test environments. So you may run Katalon elsewhere.
Yeah, and there's a question in here that I could probably use your insight on, Alon, and it's about can multiple studios, can multiple Katalon test suites connect to and execute against the same SeaLights environments? I think the answer is yes, but those test suites would need to, I think, be for the same system under test. You wouldn't want to, and I don't think you could attach, 5 different Katalon test suites for 5 different applications against the same SeaLights test environment. Is that right, Alon?
You can run multiple different suites on the same test environment. When you execute those suites, we just get the name. So if it's test suite A, test suite B, and then when you execute it, we would provide the recommendations for test suite A and test suite B. So even if you're running multiple suites on the same environment, that all of them can be optimized each, at the time that it will be executed.
Okay, here's another question. Can SeaLights identify impact of code changes on UI tests, or only unit tests and integration API tests?
Any type of testing, even manual testing. Any type of regression, API, UI, functional, end-to-end, unit tests, any type of testing that you have can be optimized.
On that note, I'll mention there was a question in here that I'm going to have to answer no to, but I'm also going to give the yes parts that are separate. So someone asked whether Katalon could test netconf and some other formats that we don't support, but we do support web testing, API testing, mobile testing, and desktop. So if your APIs are not netconf, but if they are REST or SOAP or in the near future, gee whiz, I'll come up with the third one in a second. You can also optimize those test executions with SeaLights and Katalon. And the same thing for mobile tests. We could be testing your mobile suite against your backend and knowing what needs to execute as well.
Okay. How difficult is it to integrate other testing frameworks into SeaLights test optimization?
Yeah, I mentioned that in the previous question. any test framework. Some of those test frameworks we support out of the box, like Katalon, like Cucumber, like TestNG, JUnit, NUnit. Many test frameworks are supported out of the box, but with those public APIs, even if you build your proprietary test framework, it can be optimized as well with two simple API calls. One is that reporting which tests are being executed when they are executed. Very simple API call. And then when you're about to start running your test, there is another API call that you get the list of tests that you need to skip from SeaLights. So, and then you use this API and wrap up your test framework, and then feed the test that should be skipped, and then let it run.
Great. Okay, I think we're going to wrap it up here. It looks like the flow of questions has slowed down. I'll take a peek before we officially end, but I just want to take this moment to thank everyone for joining us. We'll send you a recording of the webinar so you can watch it again or share it with your colleagues. Thank you to Coty and Alone for a really enjoyable webinar. You're welcome to visit the Katalon website and the SeaLights website for more information about both platforms. You can feel free to send any of our panelists an email. Their information is here on the screen if you want to follow up with them after the session. Sorry, I think I might have, oh no, people are just saying thank you. That's great.
And thank you, Abigail, for
oh, of course.
For hosting.
I just wanted to see if there are any more, pressing questions, but I'm glad to see that everyone really enjoyed the webinar. If you're interested in registering for SeaLight's upcoming webinars, if you want to watch one of our previous ones, you can find them under the resources section of our website. And thanks everyone for joining us, and hope to see you again soon.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks,
Thanks
everyone. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye all.